Okay, welcome. We're going to go over the cardiovascular system, and this unit we actually combine the lymphatic system and the respiratory system with the cardiovascular system, and we're going to talk about a little bit what that means. But we'll really talk about how it integrates. But we're going to do this in sections. So we're going to talk about in general cardiovascular system. We'll see how far we get, and we might get into some of the circulation pathways. You might want to grab some colors. In this unit, we'll be using mostly red, yellow, and blue. So primaries, maybe orange too. I don't know. In the future, just to let you know. Okay, so you might want to grab those, and we'll see what we can do here. Okay, so cardiovascular system. Right here, what you're seeing is a centrifuge vial, or supposed to be, of blood. They just stuck blood in it, spun it. As you can see, most of blood is liquid, and in that liquid are a bunch of dissolved fluids. So we call that liquid plasma. So I don't know if you want to make a note. That's like the liquidy part, and it's that plasma that turns into cerebrospinal fluid, or turns into lymph for the lymph system. And so that's what's got a lot of dissolved nutrients and like electrolytes, minerals, things like that, and they can circulate in the blood. Maybe some proteins, all kinds of things are in here we'll talk about later. Just as a point of interest, blood is about 20% of your extracellular fluid. So all that other fluid we were talking about, like cerebrospinal fluid, fluid in your tissue, lymph fluid, that's the rest of the fluid in your body. So blood is only 20%. So plasma is 55% of the total blood volume. If you spun it out, there is going to be a bunch of cells in the bottom. The rest of it, cellular components, is actually 45%. 45 plus 55 is 100%. So we want to change that to 45% of the total blood volume. Okay, so we do have a bunch of cells in there. And because of gravity, they would sink to the bottom. But on top of that, we would get what we call the buffy coat. And that's just because they're less dense. Just white blood cells are in there. It's a very thin layer. It's actually only 1%. We also have the platelets that'll be in there. You remember white blood cells? The fancy term for that are leukocytes. They're part of the immune system. And the platelets are for blood clotting specifically. They're like these little mini cells. And they group together and they make clotting. We'll talk about how that happens later. Red blood cells, yes, that's a big component of this, and the main component. We're going to abbreviate white blood cells, WBC. Red blood cells is RBC, so that's what that's supposed to be. Red blood cells, they carry the oxygen, and yeah, they're a lot higher in volume than any other blood cell. Okay, so there's iron. Remember iron is what's in that protein called hemoglobin. It's a globular protein that will carry oxygen because of the heme group. Heme is just iron in Greek. Okay, so that hemoglobin binds temporarily to O2, and it doesn't bind very well, but some of it does bind to CO2. But luckily, it likes O2 better, right? Because you want it to pick up oxygen more easily than CO2 in your lungs. You want to pick up that. Hematopoietic tissue, that's tissue in which blood cells are formed. Okay, that just means blood cells are going to arise in that type of tissue. So it's related to blood cells. Red bone marrow, flat and irregular bones are where you're going to get red blood cells. These cells form from stem cells first. They're not differentiated yet, and that's what makes the red blood cells in the bone marrow. Okay, we might talk a little bit about that. These erythrocytes that come from that's red blood cells coming from stem cells. So, but the blood plasma itself is 91.5% water. So even though it's got lots of nutrients, many of the things carried by the blood are dissolved in the plasma. Nutrients in the waste products. You do have CO2 dissolved in the plasma. Most CO2 is carried in the plasma, Well, so O2 is carried with the red blood cells. Because remember, red blood cells really like the O2 until your tissues need it. So CO2 is carried in the plasma in the form of a bicarbonate, okay? Which is like a special kind of ion that enables it to travel better. And it does make your blood acidic. See that little H group there? Yeah, it takes some. We have to get rid of CO2. So we can't build up. If it does, we're going to get too acidic. All right, so we got to breathe it out. Make sure you're breathing out really well. If you have asthma, your tissue is actually not going to get rid of CO2 very well. That's actually the bigger problem. So, yeah, make sure you control that asthma. So, yeah, location of your heart and pericardial membranes. We, in this class, hadn't talked about it before yet. We talked about thoracic cavity, though, your thoracic park where your heart and lungs like to play. But you also have a kind of a compartment in there that's specifically for the heart. We're talking about the heart's job, though, is to pump blood, to keep it circulating. It's located in this area that we were talking about, in between the lungs, and it's called the mediastinum. Some people pronounce it mediastinum, I guess. I've on the internet you find all kinds of pronunciations of that. That's the area, though, between the lungs and the thoracic cavity. Directly inferior to the heart is the diaphragm. So it kind of gives you the idea. That's the parameters we're looking at. Thoracic park, your thoracic cavity. I'm talking all about that kind of structure because that has to do with the cardiovascular system. Okay. There are 3 layers of pericardial membrane. Remember the membranes around the heart? The visceral, that's directly on the heart itself. Visceral means organ. And we call it visceral pericardium. That means peri is like perimeter and cardium for the heart, perimeter of the heart. Some people call that epicardium, right? Adhering directly to the heart muscle. Then we have the parietal, which means kind of like wall. And that's parietal pericardium lining this pericardial sac. So it makes that sac inside of that sac. The outside of that sac is another type of membrane that we haven't really talked about. It's a fibrous pericardium, and it's fibrous connective tissue. So it's literally the pericardial sac. When you're doing dissection and stuff, your heart is already gift wrapped, and you have to open the package because it's got that extra, and it's really thick. So it's because it's got that extra fibrous pericardium on top of it. It's a little different than the lungs. The lungs just don't have that extra fibrous layer. The function of this is where you can have serous fluid then between the visceral and the parietal layers, and that's to prevent friction as the heart beats. So sometimes you get pain in the heart, which is called angina, because it's just pain, and it's not really related to a heart attack. It's possibly caused by dehydration. You're not getting enough serous fluid in that sac, and the heart's kind of rubbing around the tissues around it. Okay. Now talking about the chambers of the heart, the tissue that forms that thick wall of the heart is the cardiac muscle. That's 2 words, cardiac muscle. Or myocardium. Remember, myo is another word for muscle. So yeah, we could call it that. This tissue contracts when which pumps the blood, and maybe we'll talk about it a little bit later. So it's specialized muscle, so that it can kind of contract and keep going on its own without having to have the brain constantly doing all the stimulation of that heart rate. The walls of the left ventricle. Okay, so left, we haven't learned about the heart yet exactly, but the left ventricle, so on the left side of the and lower side of the heart, they are the thickest because they have to pump blood with enough force to circulate around the entire body. So it's the one that's leaving the body to go to leaving the heart to go to the rest of the body. All that blood has to do a lot of distance. It has to go over a lot of distance, so it better have a lot of pressure. The right side only has to pump blood to the lungs. Okay, so it doesn't need to be as thick. The chambers of the heart are lined with another type of epithelial tissue, that simple squamous. And it's really smooth. We're going to call it, because it's kind of the outside of the inside, kind of endocardium. So it's lining the chambers of the heart that the blood travels. And then it also covers all the valves. And then we'll learn that it also covers all of the insides of all the blood vessels. And so it's one continuous simple squamous layer. This tissue is meant to maintain a very smooth surface at endocardium and prevents clotting in the chambers of the heart. Okay. Unless it's got a tear in it, and then you want it to clot so that it keeps so it repairs that endothelial lining. The valves in the heart are designed special to prevent backflow. So the blood, as you're contracting, though, it needs that back pressure, but it keeps the blood moving in one direction. And we're going to look at that picture of the heart soon. Coronary vessels. Coronary vessels are vessels of the heart itself. The purpose of the coronary vessels is to supply blood to itself, to its own myocardial tissue. Super important because your heart is working all the time. Obviously, it has to have oxygen then, in order to produce ATP and to contract. The right and left coronary arteries are branches off of the aorta itself. So it gets that fresh blood with some good blood pressure from the heart, because the aorta is leaving the heart through the left ventricle, right? And the coronary sinus is formed by the union of these coronary veins, and it returns blood. You're saying that you have the coronary arteries, and then they feed oxygen to the heart itself, and then they collect the blood collects in the coronary veins, and it returns the blood from the heart tissue into the right atrium. So the right atrium is then going to go to the lungs. If the heart muscle is deprived of its own blood supply, the heart muscle cells are going to begin to die. And this is generally because of a clot. If that happens, we call that an atherosclerosis in a coronary vessel. This is a heart attack, right? Fun fact, a heart attack is a myocardial infarction. I did not make up that word. Myocardial infarction. Okay. It's a fun word, but not really. So yeah, you want to avoid that. Okay, so the cardiac cycle is a term for the sequence of events of one heartbeat. All right. So you kind of heard of systolic and diastolic. Those are the different pressures from contraction and relaxation. So systole means contraction, and diastole means relaxation. I always think dead diastole, that's as relaxed as you can get when you're dead. Okay. You ever heard somebody who's super uptight and you're like, when are you gonna relax? And they're like, when I'm dead. That's not a good plan. You should relax now. In the cardiac cycle, when the atria are in systole, the ventricles are basically in diastole. So one is beating or contracting in systole, and the other one is resting in diastole. And when the ventricles are in systole, then the atria are in diastole. Atria, by the way, are the top parts of the heart. Remember, they're like the beginning of this heart adventure. At least for the right side has its atrium. You always think of the atrium when you come to a house. That's like that first thing you come into, the first room, and then the blood gets pumped to the ventricle, and then it leaves to go somewhere. It gets vented out, and then it collect in the other atrium, just like, oh, welcome to my house, and then it's vented out through the ventricle. So also A comes before B in the alphabet. So maybe you can remember it that way. The sequence of events of one heartbeat. All right, so we're gonna go over that. Blood continuously flows into both atria. Blood first is collecting from the body into the right atrium, and from the lungs into the left atrium, but they do it simultaneously. The pressure of incoming blood opens up the left and right AV valves. Okay, AV means, cleverly, atrioventricular. So we put atrium and ventricle together with an O. Remember how we do that? Okay, so we just say AV valves instead of atrioventricular. 2/3 of the atrial blood flows passively, without any help, into the ventricle, but the rest need to come through contraction. So the atria then are going to contract together, synchronous. They're both on the top of the heart, so the heart top contracts, to pump the remaining blood into the ventricles. The atria relax, and the ventricles then begin to contract. The atria then go into diastole, and the ventricles go into systole, and the ventricles are able to pump the blood to either the rest of the body or to the lungs, depending if it's on the right and left. But because of that, the right and left AV valves close, and the aortic and pulmonary semilunar valves open. Okay, they call them semilunar because they're like these crescent shaped, kind of like the moon, sort of semi-moon shaped. The ventricles, they fully contract and pump the blood into the arteries. So that's happening. The arteries deliver things, and meanwhile the ventricles relax, and then the semilunar valves close to prevent backflow, right? Okay, so we'll look at the picture and you'll see, or maybe you've already looked at the picture and you can see where that happens to prevent backflow. So that is one cardiac cycle. You don't want to have any more backflow into the heart. The cardiac cycle normally creates 2 heart sounds, though, because of these 2 sequences. The first sound is caused by the closure of the AV valve. Okay, so it's a slapping of the valve that you're actually hearing. The second sound is caused by the closure of the semilunar valves. You have lub-dub. There it is, lub-dub, lub-dub. Any extra sound we call a heart murmur. The heart's murmuring, it's talking, it's having extra sounds. And that's probably some possible prolapsing of the valve, or the valve's not quite closing all the way, or it's sort of snapping extra. All right. Other things can be happening too. Cardiac muscle has built-in pacemakers, though, that keep the heart beating. Isn't that great? It creates its own electrical impulse, all right, which make the heart beat. So it has this little AV nodes, actually, that generate this electrical signal so that it can then propagate. And we know because the heart is branched, it's connected by these intercalated discs, that muscle tissue then transmits the signal from its beginning top AV to the bottom. So it was top, bottom, atrioventricular direction. But we do have the medulla that regulate the rate of contraction, so it doesn't get all weird. It can stay steady. Also, it can make the heart beat faster if you're in fight or flight. Very good. Okay, now we're going to talk about the lining of the blood vessels and the structure and function. Blood vessels, they carry blood away from the heart, away from the heart. Yeah, arteries. They should have the most amount of pressure. Small ones are baby arteries, and they're called arterioles. Arterioles. Okay. And these are vessels that carry blood from the arteries. Oh, I'm sorry, the next thing. Vessels that carry blood from these little baby arteries to the venules, which are baby veins, venules. In between, that's the capillaries. And the capillaries, they're very, the vessels that carry blood vessels that carry blood from capillaries to the hearts or veins. Well, don't forget they're from venules too. So really we should say venules. Here, let's correct that. And so we have veins that are actually going to go and collect into a vein cave, a huge set of veins, the vena cava vein cave. Got it. All right, we're going to go over that. Don't worry. All blood vessels then have a lining. That's tunica, so it's tunic. It's intima, which is very close. It's the intimate small, so it's that inner lining. And that's their simple squamous. All blood vessels have it. So we don't want clotting when we shouldn't have clotting. Squamous. Remember the squamous are flat. Simple means one layer. So they're flat, smooth, one layer. So that's its function to protect from clotting. Okay. This makes the inner lining of all blood vessels. Here's where you should put and prevent abnormal clotting. Still, you might get some clotting when you need to. Vessel gets broken, but this will hopefully prevent that from happening when it doesn't need to happen. Arteries and veins have a middle layer then called the tunica media, so that's middle, and that's made of the smooth muscle. So it actually has its own little contraction. Also, it can be controlled, and the diameter can be made to relax and get bigger, the muscles, or the muscles could contract and make the diameter smaller. So it can affect your blood pressure. But also has some elastic nature to it, because it needs to be able to withstand the bulging and then slap back into regular form so that it keeps that back pressure going. These let blood vessels stretch and contract to maintain that diastolic blood pressure. Back pressure is the diastolic. Right? That's your low number when you get your blood taken. The systolic is that higher number, which hopefully isn't too high. The tunica externa, that's the outer layer of arteries and veins, and it's really made of fibrous connective tissue. So it's tough to prevent the rupture of blood vessels. Okay, so looking at the picture though, as you can see, not all blood vessels have all three layers. Okay. First one is an artery. All right, it's got smooth muscle. It's got that inner layer of the simple squamous epithelial tissue. Squamous. Just abbreviate epithelial tissue. And then it's got that tunica externa, that's fibrous connective tissue. That makes sense. Also, its diameter is 1.8 centimeters. It's not real huge, okay? But it's got a lot of pressure then. It's got a lot of velocity in that blood to shoot it where it needs to go into the arterioles and then the capillaries and then hopefully collect into the venules and the veins. Now here, this next one is typical vein. It's got the smooth muscle. It's got everything the artery has, but as you can see, it's got less smooth muscle and less fibrous connective tissue. You can kind of see that. Here's your inner layer, simple squamous. Oop, I ran out of space. Sorry. Abbreviated, simple squamous, and then fibrous. As you can also see, the diameter then, actually, you can't really see it on this picture. Never mind. The diameter is also bigger, by the way. These look like they're exactly the same diameter. But they're bigger. They also have a bigger inner diameter. And the reason why is because you need to collect as much blood as possible for the rest of the body so you can get it back to the heart and get it oxygenated. So it doesn't have as much pressure as the arteries do. So it doesn't need the helpful fibrous connective tissue because it's not as under pressure. It doesn't need as much and as much muscle behind that. This little guy over here, by the way, this is not proportionate. He's tiny. Okay, this is your 0.0005 centimeter diameter capillary. Yeah, maybe you guessed that. You're like, what? The capillaries, as you can see later, they're more of a network of really, 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 really tiny vessels. You don't even know you're cutting one when you cut one, you know. When you cut a little artery, it or arterial, hopefully not artery, it'll kind of spurt a little. If you cut a vein, it's bleeding a lot, but it's oozy, you know. And capillaries are just the ones in between. You can just bleed tiny blood, and then you have to kind of, when trying to get a blood sample, you have to like milk it there. So it's pretty much just simple connective or simple squamous. Wow, I'm falling apart here. Simple. Let's not make it more complicated. Simple squamous epithelial tissue. And that's it. So yeah, very delicate, but there's a lot of capillaries, so it's spreading out that pressure, so they don't need to withstand all that pressure. And these, ladies and gentlemen, are supposed to be the cells that are the simple squamous epithelial tissue. Yeah, this is supposed to be magnified so big that you can see the actual nuclei of the cells, and the cells themselves are just that smooth, flat surface. And they're also involved with signaling. They signal when things are inflamed and they think that there's an infection or there's some bleeding. It might initiate blood clot. If they think there's going to be loss of blood, if there's loss of blood or there's bleeding, blood where it's not supposed to be. So it's so these cells do get involved immune system wise and such with what's going on in the body. All right. So yeah, let's talk about in veins. Actually, the veins themselves are weird. Their lining itself is folded into valves. So we have valves along our veins because otherwise the blood doesn't really want to flow from the capillaries and venules of our toesies all the way to our heart against gravity, right? So we kind of have to make sure that it's with all that back pressure, it can get forward and move forward and stay forward and prevent backflow of blood. Most blood is moving against the force of gravity to get blood back in the heart. Makes sense. Capillaries, they're made of simple squamous. Yes, we talked about that. Connective tissue, or epithelial tissue, sorry. It's a lining. Besides being smooth to prevent abnormal clotting, this tissue is so thin, it's actually also allowing for the diffusion of gases and other substances between blood and surrounding cells. And you could also arguably say that it allows for filtration too, because it doesn't allow large cells to pass or anything. But it might allow for some, capillaries might allow for some oozing of plasma where it needs to with to travel with nutrients. We talked a little bit about the ventricles in the brain, the choroid plexus, where you have little capillaries that are going to create cerebrospinal fluid by allowing the plasma to diffuse or to move and filter through. So we can get blood, well, mostly plasma and nutrients into surrounding cells and tissue. Large, very permeable capillaries are called sinusoids. That's what we were talking about in the brain, that when those vessels need to pick up in those sinuses, pick up that cerebrospinal fluid and bring it back into circulation. So those venules in the brain, a little more permeable, also a little larger. Unlike most capillaries, though, those allow big things and can allow bigger things like protein and blood cells to wander a little bit. Okay, not necessarily in the brain, but these ones you can find that will allow the cells to wander and proteins to wander are more found in your liver and your spleen and red bone marrow. So that's how otherwise your red blood cells wouldn't be able to get out of the red bone marrow, right? So that they could get into circulation, for example. And liver and spleen are continually kind of filtering and monitoring the blood. So yeah, they need to be able to have for substances to kind of pass back and forth. So here's a weird little printout, I'll print out of a big picture. Big picture, you have artery, but actually you know that's coming off of the heart from the aorta. So to make this picture a little bit bigger, I want to add the aorta. Okay, and then heart and lungs. So let's just looks like a heart with 2 ears. Yeah, heart and lungs. Heart and lungs. You pump the blood for me. Heart and lungs. You help me actually breathe. I don't know, I just came with that. Okay, so really happy about that. Arteries go into capillaries, but what's that structure between? Baby arteries, right? Kind of cutting that blood pressure down. And we love to call them arterioles. Just think of them as littler raviolis. Baby ravies. Okay, these are the capillaries. So notice how you get arteries and arterioles and such, and they're like long strands and they're going in a certain direction. There's pretty much a defined direction. Capillaries, kind of a network, and they allow the blood to wander, all right? Yeah, so blood could go, you know, here and then there and then here and then there, and I don't know, just whatever path needs to. So hopefully all the nutrients get transferred. So it takes away toxins too. We're taking away CO2, maybe taking away lactic acid, uric acid, some byproducts of metabolism and all kinds of things, collecting them in the baby veins. Remember what the baby veins are called? Venules. Oh, so cute. The venules. And they have their little valves here to keep the blood flowing through the big old veins to the vein cave. All right, vena cava. And the vein cave allows the blood to go back to the heart and lungs and pick up some oxygen, dump off its CO2, pick up some blood pressure, and get shot out through the aorta again, the rest of the body. Okay, thinking we need to kind of stop there. It's a good place to stop because then we can go over some more stuff a little bit later. All right. Let me see. No, it's not too bad. Okay. I hope you have your colors. All right. If you didn't have your colors, you better grab them now. Blood pressure. Blood pressure is the force exerted by the blood against the walls of the blood vessels. Okay. Ooh, I got a pen now. Cooking in Crisco now. Okay, we talked a little bit about it. So it's pressure on the sides of the walls because that's going to determine, that and the diameter determine how much blood flow you're going to have. So blood pressure is measured in units called millimeters of mercury. That's what we usually use for barometric pressure. So that's related to the atmosphere, but we still use it in other areas of science. Blood pressure is created by the pumping of the left ventricle of the heart, because remember, that's where the blood is leaving the heart in the left side. So it's left the heart to the left ventricle. Now you can remember that. The systolic blood pressure is a pressure when the left ventricle is contracting. So that's going to be the highest number because that's hopefully got the most amount of force because that's when the big mumbo jumbo's contracting of the left ventricle is thicker than the right. Diastolic blood pressure, remember diastolic is dead, not really, just relaxed, is when the left ventricle is relaxed. All right, and that's going to be your lower number. Diastolic. So systolic over diastolic is what you usually measure. 120 over 80 approximately is normal. For some of y'all that have low blood pressure, like me, it might be 60 over 90, and that's normal for me, I guess. And then too much higher than that, and they usually want you to watch what you're doing with your diet, exercise, and stuff like that, and see if they need to bring those numbers down because it really affects your kidneys when you have a too high blood pressure and your capillaries and stuff like that. And there might be a reason, so you need to deal with that too. So go see your doctor, right? Keep seeing your doctor. Keep figuring out what blood pressure medication works for you because the first time usually doesn't work. Honestly, it's just one of those things. All right. Blood pressure is highest in the aorta. That makes sense. Or arteries, which come right off the aorta, and then decreases into the arterioles and capillaries. And it's lowest in the, yes, you guessed it, veins. Now, we're going to look at this picture. We're going to add some color to it. I realized that it got colored when I printed it, and I apologize for that. Oh my gosh, we have color. It's not, color's not bad, it's just we want to color code this. Okay, so maybe I'll try to use like a different blue. Yeah, oh well. It's not that different. Oh well. So we have pulmonary circulation, and that's the pathway between the heart and the lungs. Okay, pulmonary, you've heard saying, is lungs. Of course, we're talking about circulation, so it's got to involve the heart. But the pathway of the pulmonary circulation begins at the right ventricle, which pumps blood through the pulmonary arteries. Now, wait a minute, you're like, but the blood should be not oxygenated if it's coming to the lungs. Not really. True. So this is the only time that unoxygenated blood is going to be in an artery. The only reason why an artery is called an artery is because it's leaving the heart and has a certain structure, because it's going to have a higher pressure when it's leaving the heart. So it's going to have be a little more muscular and fibrous and handle that pressure. Okay, so it's going to pump the blood through the pulmonary artery into the lungs. Blood in the pulmonary veins returns the oxygenated blood to the left atrium. The blood's getting ready to leave the body, or leave the heart to go to the body. The purpose of this pathway of circulation is to exchange CO2 and O2 between the blood in the pulmonary capillaries. So yeah, you still do the thing. You got the pulmonary arteries and arterioles, and then capillaries, and you do that blood gas exchange. And then the lung sacs that actually are tiny enough, and they're in the corners and they're surrounded by capillaries, are called alveoli. And they're very, very tiny, lots and lots of little grapey looking sacs. And that's what the capillaries surround. That does that air exchange, okay? So where's that? Yeah, you kind of see here that the pathway began at the right ventricle. So I'm gonna just extra shade that, be extra shady today. All right, and then it's going to pick up blood in the lungs. It's going to pick up O2 in the lungs and get rid of your CO2, and it's going to come back into the right atrium of the heart, and then left atrium of the heart, left ventricle, and then it's going to leave through the left ventricle. Okay, so that's it for pulmonary circulation. Not super like, oh wow, crazy, oh my gosh. All right. Systemic circulation is all the rest of the body. All right, and I'm going to highlight it. Okay, so we kind of talked about it. Here, now I'm going to look at the picture. We're going to look at the picture. Let me try to zoom out a little bit. So, pathway is going to begin now in the left ventricle, because the blood is leaving the heart, right? It's going to go into the aorta. It's going to branch into the superior and inferior aortas. So the superior is going to go to like the head and arms, and it's going to go into the the arterioles, and then it's going to go into the capillaries, and then it's going to go into the venules and collect in the jugular vein, and it's going to go into the superior vena cava, right? Vein cave, and to go back to the heart into the right atrium, and then the blood's going to join the pulmonary circulation. Okay, so for the inferior, or the inferior aortic arch, pretty much the rest of the body gets served. This would be not just the legs, but all of your guts, your organs and such. So you have mesenteric arteries that are going to feed some of this, these mambo jumbos. And what's missing here is the spleen. So can we draw the spleen in? Just give it a nod. Say, okay, Mr. Spleen. He's going to be filtering and taking out old red blood cells that are dead and not working so good, and other things. And then the blood flow is going to go into the digestive tract. super awesome. So we can absorb nutrients. All right, yay, that's our favorite thing. Goes through these little capillaries and surrounds those intestines. This is a very simplified picture. Like, it's all in there in your guts, and you got all kinds of capillaries in there. In the mesentery, that's what supports it. Remember, the mesentery like adds a structure for those capillaries so that they can not be torn apart here with their digesting and playing soccer and sports. Okay, then the blood goes directly to the liver. This is actually the hepatic portal system. Hepatic, means the liver. Because the liver is going to monitor what you're eating, how much of, and hopefully like process vitamins and, make signals and say, oh, shoot, we ate a lot of sugar. We is going to need to, store that up, store that extra sugar. Or maybe we didn't get enough stuff food, so we're going to try to release some, release stored sugar and release energy from fats. So when it's done with the liver, it's going to return to the inferior vena cava, the inferior vein cave, and go into the right atrium and go back into the cardiopulmonary circulation. So yeah, let's just remind ourselves, this is hepatic portal system. They call it a portal because it bypasses the rest of the organs and body. And yeah, the liver is going to also help detoxify the blood, and the spleen too. So only part of your blood is being filtered at any one time. So hopefully your blood manages to wander and circulate all parts of the body, so it can really do that efficiently. So another part is going to go down into your kidneys. You have your renal arteries and veins, and yeah, could go back to the vein cave, the inferior vein cave too, and of course the whole rest of your body. This is the iliac artery. That's your legs. Okay, so they're really serious here. We're going also to your legs, all the rest, and get back into this blood circulation with the vein cave. I totally forgot. This drawing is actually not accurate. Let me change this. Hilarious. It does not go directly into each other and join each other. The superior and inferior vena cava never meet. They actually go into the vein cave of the right atrium. They go into the right atrium directly. So what we need to do here is, maybe fix our diagram. I have no idea what the heck happened there. I mean, it's a nice idea, but we really do need it just to go directly into the atrium. And what really stands out in my mind, and why I know we get confused with this, is when you're dissecting and you take off the inferior and superior vena cava, you accidentally take off the right atrium half the time. I mean, full of the time, because the superior and inferior vena cava, they become the right atrium. Okay, so there's the inferior vena cava, vein cave here, and it's returning blood directly into the right atrium. Sorry about that. Yeah, that stinks. Okay. But we'll, talk about it down here. This pathway, the pathway of the systemic circulation, we talked about to all of the body systems. It began at the left ventricle, right where the blood left the heart, which pumps blood to the aorta and the rest of the body and head. The blood in the superior and inferior vena cava then return the blood to the right atrium, right? Not directly to each other, but directly to the right atrium. The purpose of the pathway of circulation is to exchange materials between the blood in the systemic capillaries and the cells and tissue fluid throughout the body. Cool. All right, let's look on the next page. Hepatic portal circulation. We just talked about that. Maybe I'll try to leave this here a little bit. Blood from the valves. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the wrong thing. Digestive system. Yeah, I would say that. And the spleen. We talked about the spleen first. It circulates through the liver before returning to the heart. We'll talk more about the liver later, but it plays an important role in regulating blood nutrient levels. Basically, large veins from the digestive organs dump blood into the liver, where it does a give and take. And the hepatic veins take blood from the liver and dump it into the vena cava. The vena cava. Okay. All right. So I'm thinking we did pretty well. And the hepatic portal system, I just want to highlight that, going back to this picture. Maybe you want to make that another color too of its own, or just kind of highlight that the hepatic portal system, starting from the heart, going to the spleen and the digestive system and the liver, and then the inferior vena cava. That's the hepatic portal system. And we also have things called the hepatic vein that leaves the liver there. And the hepatic portal vein is what enters the liver from the digestive system. Okay, so those will help us learn some systems and blood circulation, and then we're gonna go more in depth in the we'll do some fetal circulation, but also the heart first and the structure itself, because it's kind of confusing sometimes. Thank you so much for playing along here and traveling with us through your circulation of your body, and more next time. I hope you guys have a good night, and thank you.